Hi, friends. Just a quick note before we jump into this week's episode. In Stride is brought to you by Ride IQ. Ride IQ is a first of its kind equestrian coaching platform that will transform your independent schooling rides. Ride IQ members get access to the private mobile app with hundreds of on demand listen while you ride audio lessons taught by top eventing, jumper, and dressage coaches. And since you like podcasts, the Ride IQ app also includes over 100 exclusive podcast episodes to keep you company during your hacks, your commute, your barn chores, or whatever it is you do while you listen. Membership is only $29.99 per month, and every membership automatically includes a 2-week unlimited access free trial. Get started by downloading the Ride IQ mobile app on iPhone or Android. On today's episode of In Stride, Sinead talks with Elsa Sinclair. Elsa spent a year with a 5-year-old wild Mustang seeking to answer the questions, what if horses were given a choice? Would they let us ride them? She used no tools or equipment at all with the Mustang because she wanted the process to be more collaborative and less about force or bribes. Elsa documented the process in a film she wrote, directed, and starred in called Taming Wild, A Girl and A Mustang. Elsa went on to make a second film called Taming Wild, Pura Vida. That film documents a trek across Costa Rica with 2 wild Mustangs. Both trailers are linked in the show notes. Elsa also has an in-progress documentary called Taming Wild Evolution that is her journey with 2 stallions. Today, Elsa travels extensively around the world teaching clinics based on her online course called Freedom-Based Training, a training method she affectionately calls the slowest training method in the world. Today, Sinead and Elsa are talking about just that, freedom-based training. We hope you enjoy this episode.
All right, everybody, I'm so excited. I just told Elsa when she hopped on here, I was going through my old notes from a clinic when you were out here in March of 2021. It's been a while.
It has been a little while. Time flies.
It's crazy, actually. I'm just looking at the date on the top of my notes. But I pulled them up about an hour ago and I was like, no, I need more time actually, because I started writing more things and I had more questions. But thank you so much for taking time in your busy schedule to chat with us. I think, our audience at Ride IQ is growing and the podcast here is growing. And I think people are going to be really excited to listen to this discussion and hear what you have to say. And, one of the things I really wanted to start with is just looking at things through a different lens and a different perspective. And it's funny because like on the 3rd page of notes that I put in a big box through a horse's lens. And obviously you had said something along those lines. So I'm going to stop rambling, and I just would love to hear a little bit, let our listeners know a little bit about where you are right now and what you've been doing and the clinic series and your everything about you. Just tell us everything.
Everything in like 3 short words.
Yes, exactly. Maybe 5.
Okay. All right. I am on San Juan Island right now, which is off the coast of Washington State, about as far northwest as you can go before you hit Canada. Mm-hmm. And this is my home. I've lived here since I was about 10 years old. And I'm here with my horses right outside my window. I have a tiny home in the middle of my horse paddock.
That's so awesome.
I spend about half my year now traveling for clinics and half my year at home talking pretty much only to my horses, except for you. You're an exception.
Thanks. I'm in the paddock.
That's right.
You might be careful. Don't send me your address. You're going to look outside your window and I'm just going to be there with the horses. That's so awesome. So you've been on a clinic tour right now, right? Are you just back in town for a little bit, or how's that?
I am just back. I have about a week before I leave again. I went to the UK and Belgium and France and then Indiana on my way home.
Oh my God.
And then in about a week, I head out to do the Netherlands and Germany and Poland.
Wow.
I'll be home for a couple of weeks and then do it all again.
So it's a major global tour. I mean, you're not traveling like 6 hours. I mean, I guess you're traveling 6 hours on a plane.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about plane commutes. When I was a teenager, somebody said to me, they said, you know, you can do any job you want to do as long as you get good enough at it and you're willing to travel anywhere in the world where they want you. And I went,
wow.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. So funny enough, that's what I do now. I've developed myself an incredibly niche market.
Yeah.
And it's in demand if I'm willing to travel. But it's not the type of thing that you do necessarily in your hometown, which is good because I like my hometown to just sort of sink into my hermitage and play with my horses and not speak a whole lot of English for a while.
I love that. So speaking of this niche market, can you explain a little bit to those of our listeners that might not know what that market is and what your expertise, where your expertise lie?
So my expertise is in reading horse body language and building a language that they can communicate with in return. So we all use body language. Horses are a lot more aware of it than people are. And God, it's been 10 years now. About 10 years ago, I set myself this project with a wild Mustang off the range that if I spent an entire year with her and I never trapped her between me and a fence, never used a halter or a rope, never used food rewards, never put pressure on her in any obvious way, could I convince her that being ridden and being a riding horse was fun? And I really didn't know if it was possible, but luckily a good friend of mine said, well, if you're going to do it, we should film it. And I said, okay, how do we do that? And she told me what camera to buy, and it just sort of snowballed, turned out way more successful than I thought it was going to be. I think I learned more in that year than I'd learned in like the 30 some years before that. It was just such an intensely steep learning curve because as a wild Mustang, as a fully adult horse, she knew who she was. She knew who she wanted to be. She knew all the things about herself. And when I did something she didn't like, she didn't need to buck or bite or run or kick. She just walked away.
Right. And you're like, damn it.
So to have a horse that was that free to speak her mind, and then I had to reorganize. What did I say? How did I present my body? How could I present my body differently? What was my feel? What was my timing? How would I change it so that she wants to stay in this conversation with me, given that I don't have a food reward? I can't trap her in the corner. She's got 100 acres of pasture. She could wander around and 20 friends that she likes better than me. How do I present myself in a way that she wants to play? And I learned a lot. And so now that's my niche market is I go around the world teaching people how to read their horses and how to communicate with their horses if there's no external pressure involved. Now, it's not practical for most people. So 99% of the people I teach are going to alternate this with other types of training. They're going to combine it with whatever training they already do. And the idea is that if I give you some tools to help you read your horse better, and I give you some ways of doing things that maybe you hadn't thought of before, then when you go back to your ordinary types of training, hopefully it all works better because you know your horse better. And that's the goal.
Which it's, and it's wild because when I, before I knew you and before you came out here, I thought there's just no way, like there's just no, I don't understand is really what I thought. But I was curious. And, I thought, well, we've got competition and performance horses and we are getting paid to train these horses and we have to have these results and blah, 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 blah. And, I didn't realize how actually self-centric that was. Like, we have to do this. I'm competing. I have to train, I was like completely looking at it, and I don't want to say from the wrong perspective, but just from my perspective. And to turn that kind of on its head and start, because you have this scale that we can talk about in a second. And it was very interesting because the majority of the culture I had been raised in starts at one end of the scale. And you just start at the other end of the scale. And what you're talking about here is that wherever you lie there, wherever your preferences are, it doesn't really matter. But knowing kind of that range of that scale just helps. I mean, it's just immensely helpful in your thought process. It becomes like, I found it opened up a whole new way of thinking that made things so much more fun and actually broader. And yeah, it was just really, really cool. But I want to back up for a second, because what in God's name inspired you to come up with this idea of, going into a field and doing something that really probably at least has not been documented, has not been done before upon documentation? Like, where did that come from?
So it was actually a challenge from a student of mine. She actually confronted me with the question. She said, so if you took an adult horse who knew who she was, and you never put any pressure of tools on her, would she ever want to carry a person, a rider? And I said, gosh, I don't know that anybody's ever asked that question. And then it became this obsession where I felt like, well, if nobody's asked the question, maybe somebody should ask the question. It's kind of like, if nobody's walked on the moon, maybe we should send somebody up there to walk on the moon. Not that it's maybe very practical, but if it's never been done before, somebody should try and see what you learn along the way.
Yeah.
And so then I started obsessing about it, and I started telling all of my horse trainer friends that somebody should do this, and they all laughed at me. And apparently I was the only one crazy enough to do it.
So before this kind of pivot in your life, what were you doing before that? Where were horses in your life before this journey?
So I'm a third generation horse trainer. So I come by it honestly. My grandfather was a trainer. My mom was a trainer. And up to this point, I had done a number of different things, but for the past couple of years, right before this project, I was fully immersed in the Pirelli program. So I was a Pirelli devotee. I was on my way to becoming an instructor. That was what I thought I was going to do with my life. And then I'm really grateful to them. I feel like they set me up in a lot of ways to ask good questions. And even if I didn't know the answers, I sort of had a framework to sort of ask the questions. If this doesn't work, how do you present it differently? So, looking at that spectrum of all the different ways that you can train a horse, I would go, this is what I know so far. I've done a little bit of eventing. I've done a little bit of dressage. I've done a little bit of endurance racing. I've done a little bit of Tellington Jones equine awareness method. I've done some polo cross. I've done a gamut of things. How do I take everything that I've done and then turn it upside down and say, if I was going to do that without a bridle, without a halter, without food rewards, what's left?
Right. Me. Just me. Yeah. That's a bold thing to put out there. I know. Do you like me? Yes, please. And if you don't, I will change.
Yeah. And, honestly, I gave myself a year, and I said, if I'm failing miserably a year from now, I might just say, well, maybe it's not possible. And I'll go back to more traditional training methods or innovative training methods, but something that's actually worked for somebody before.
Right.
And first of all, I ended up with an amazing horse. I don't know how I got so lucky. And second of all, it felt like it was a lot of serendipity involved and how pieces fell into the right place for me to understand things that I'd never even thought to ask about before. So I feel really lucky. A lot of it felt like just showing up, being present, and then seeing what one puzzle piece led to the next.
So what did day one look like? You're like, I'm going to have my coffee, and this is what we do. I'm just going to show up. I mean, is that what day one was?
Yeah. So because of the laws, when you get a wild Mustang, you can't have them in just any enclosure. It has to be 6-foot high fencing that's solid, and it has to be, in a place where they're not going to run off into the community. So I had scraped together all the money I had to build as big of a pen as I could, but it wasn't as big as I wanted to at that point. And so my main concern that first day was that I was always closer to the fence than the horse was. So if she got close to the fence, I either had to leave the enclosure or go all the way to the other fence, so that I showed her that I was not trying to trap her against anything.
Right.
And then from there, it was just a lot of playing eye contact games where I looked at her and I looked away, and I developed sort of a plan. The whole idea was to build curiosity and engagement from her mentally. And so if I could look at her until she was a tiny bit curious and then look away, that gave her room to become more curious.
Right.
And then when she kind of lost interest, I would look at her until she became curious, and then I would look away to give her room to become more curious. And what was amazing, it was actually within the first day, she allowed me to touch her. She allowed me to take the number tag off her neck. And I had expected that to take weeks, and she was right there, right in there with me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's go back to this like freedom-based training. That's kind of how you frame this, right? Is that still where we're at? Freedom-based training?
That's what I call it.
Oh, perfect. And so I have written down here feedback, expression, feelings, which I'm assuming are a few of the things that you said, and to tailor the training around that. And then the big letters I have circled here is your leader and your follower, and then these different leadership types. And I'm assuming was it after your year or while your year was taking place that you started to establish or categorize these different leadership roles, or was that?
No, that wasn't until about 4 years later, actually.
Oh, wow. Really?
So, yeah. So I filmed the movie. And then when I got finished filming the movie, I was broke and I was a single parent, and I just had to put everything on the shelf. Right. So I turned the mayor out and the pastor, and I went to work full time as a fairly traditional dominant trainer, helping people with whatever they wanted help with. And it was about a year later that someone said, "What about that project you were doing?" Right. And I was like, "Oh yeah, it turned out really, really well. But I'm doing different stuff now." And they're like, "Well, would you teach us some of what you did?" And I was like, "Oh, you want to know?" Right. Like, I was surprised. I thought this was going to be my own little novelty project, and that people would watch the film and they'd be like, "Oh, that was really sweet, but it takes too long." Right. But anyway, so about a year after I started filming, or about a year after I finished filming, I started teaching it. And once I started teaching it, I realized I needed words for this. Like, I'd been doing everything on feeling, like what feels right. And I'd really just been reverse engineering every training that I'd ever done. So in terms of normal training, this is what I would do with my arms or my body or my hands or my, this is what I would do. But if it doesn't work, how do we break this down into bite-sized pieces that the horse actually is interested and curious about instead of being overwhelmed by? Right. And so I didn't really have any words for that until I started teaching it. And then I would stay awake all night going, okay, I have this feeling, like I know what I did. How do I describe it? Or how do I explain why I think this is rational and logical? Because I know the horses are going to respond to it. I've already figured that part out. But explaining it to the people so that they trust me enough to try it, that was where it got really interesting.
That's wild because, well, it's so interesting because it's very rare. I mean, this is where I feel like Linda Pirelli is so amazing. Like she can she's such a good teacher. She can take something that somebody's doing in a feeling and that they have no idea how to express, and she can put it into a learnable, digestible framework. And you go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I can actually teach that and understand that. And a lot of times, like, and it happened, when you were here as well, like somebody says something and you're like, yes, that's what I was feeling. And you just were able to put that into some context, which feels so great. Like it makes you feel like you're not insane, or you aren't, it's not even insane, but that I guess probably in traditional training, you feel like some of those feelings that you have are just out there, like they're just out there. They're just energy and they don't matter and it's whatever, but your gut is telling you they're more relevant than you give them time for or space for. And so when you put it into these different leadership types, I love it. I mean, it makes it tangible. So can we talk about that? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
To talk through these?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
That's sort of, it's where I start. It's where I start my teaching. And, I was struggling for a way to come up with what I was doing, a way to talk about it. And I borrowed Mark Rashid's term from all of his book, where he talks about the passive leader, because, you know, I've read all of his books and I love the way he writes. And
It's very story. He tells
the
his stories.
yeah. And so he talks about the passive leader in the herd as being the one that's not obvious, the one that is not dominant in the ways we're used to seeing it, but the horse that everybody wants to follow. When they go to water, everybody wants to go to water. And I thought, you know, that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand why that works, or how it works. And so the first couple of years, I just talked about it as passive leadership. And then I realized that there was actually two parts to passive leadership that made it a lot more understandable. And one was when you take more action around the horse than they're taking. And the other one was where you match or mirror or mimic the horse. And those are the two sort of sides of the coin that go in passive leadership. So I called them passive leadership and supportive leadership.
Right.
With the idea that supportive leadership is where you're moving around the horse, and what you're trying to do is trying to find a reasonable place where the horse goes, yes, when you stand there, I'm comfortable with you matching me. Because remember, in my film, like, my goal was to ride this horse. And I thought sitting on her back is just, it's the same as being on the left side or being on the right side. It's just a place I could be. But I can't obviously jump on her back on day one and say, will you be happy carrying me around? Like, I've got to build up to that. So the beginning of passive leadership for me was working around the horse and saying, if I stand here, is that good for you? Can I read your expressions? Can I read your body language? And can I know how long that's good for you? And then do it again. Move around the horse, find the next place. Is this good for you? How long is this good for you? And the idea is, by mixing that passive leadership and that supportive leadership, you're establishing a trust with the horse that you're going to do things that are okay for them. And if you don't, they walk away. So it's really, really simple, but incredibly complicated at the same time. And so what I learned to do is read the pre-signals that the horse gave, you know, before they walked away. What else did they do to tell me that's a little overwhelming for me? Maybe you could move before I have to leave. And really what it came down to, that I'm teaching a lot more right now, is seeing curiosity on a spectrum. So the more curious they are, the more they're going to want to see what happens next, and they want to do more with you. But the thing is that curiosity, it's like a muscle, and it gets tired. And when that curiosity muscle gets tired, they get overwhelmed, and then they get self-defensive, which would be they're concerned about something, and they're either going to push into you or they're going to run away. And you have to figure out, before you cross that line into concern, what do you have to change so they don't cross that line? Because in most horse training, we expect the horse to change. But in freedom-based training, we've got nothing to pressure the horse to change. So we've got to change the human instead.
Well, and when you think about it that way, like when you're thinking about a horse being tired, or like their brain being tired, I mean, the best thing you could probably do is just walk away, right? It's just to stop. I mean, if you can't add more in that moment.
Well, ideally, you get to the point where the horse can take a little pause while you're there. And you get to the point where, like, their muscles get a little bit soft and relaxed, and their eyes get a little bit droopy, and their ears get a little bit softer. And they just take a beat or two, and then they get curious again.
Gotcha.
And so what I do is I call that comfort. So they kind of settle into comfort, and they go, this is okay. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be curious. I don't have to be engaged. I can just be comfortable here. And then they can wake up and go, oh, but actually I want to know what happens next. And to the degree they can bounce back and forth between comfort and curiosity in your company, they want you to stay. But if they get too stuck in comfort, they end up getting a little bit overreactive, like they're not aware enough. And they'll kind of bounce out of comfort into concern, like, you know, the noise behind the tree or the leaf that blew or something. They were comfortable, and then they get startled out of it. And so they've got to go to curiosity before they get startled. Because if they're curious, they go, oh, that leaf, it was kind of fun. It blew a little bit. It entertained me. But if they're super comfortable when that leaf blows, sometimes they just rebound out of it. So
it's so, I mean, this is probably a little bit of a loaded question, but like once you start to see this and once you start to read this, I mean, is it quite, because your level of understanding this language that they're speaking is so developed now that most horses are probably screaming, and the rider's like, why won't they just let me know what they want? And you're like, they've said it 15 times. But it's got to be very difficult when you can see so clearly some expression or what they're saying or what they need, and there's situations where those needs aren't being met, or they're not being seen or heard, or any of that type of thing. I mean, that's got to be quite tricky, actually.
It is, but the beauty of what I teach is it puts everything in slow motion. So basically, where you have a horse in a more intense situation, if they start to get concerned, they're going to get quite concerned.
Right.
In freedom-based training, they get a little concerned, they take 3 steps to the left.
Right.
And you go, oh, they won't let me stand at their shoulder anymore. They move
Right.
too fast for me to stay at their shoulder. And it's so slow and gentle that I find that students, number one, don't get offended as much.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not as frustrating. And also the horses don't get offended. Like they feel like, oh, she's not listening to me, but I don't really have to yell because I have absolute freedom to take 3 steps to the left.
Right. So interesting. So crazy. So and like the spectrum that you're talking about here too is like kind of having everything like good and bad on the spectrum, and where I really and I use it a lot in my teaching now is when you spoke a lot about horses being in that freeze, and that turning that freeze into thinking, and that you just have to trust your gut, realizing, is this getting better or is it getting worse? Is this getting better or is it getting worse? And like, I can't tell you how many times like I say that to people, and it's alleviating because you say like training horses is on a spectrum. It's not good or bad. It's just, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Yeah. And so can you talk about that? Because I think you spoke about fight and flight and freeze, and then you had the other end of the spectrum there for people to think about.
So everybody knows fight, flight, freeze, but most people think of freeze as that place where the horse is catatonic and they're about to fall over and they're completely dissociated. And I think that there's a lot of really useful freeze that we miss, and that's usually the precursor. That's the tipping point, the place where you can really go. Is it getting better or is it getting worse from here? So I actually think freeze happens in 2 places. So freeze happens actually just before they get concerned. And you can see it with kind of tight muscles where their ears stop moving, their eyes stop moving, and their brain just kind of gets rigid. And there you have to think, are they going to recover from this? Because if they recover from it, they'll soften up a little bit and they'll get curious again. But if they don't recover from it, they're going to keep escalating until they show you more fight or flight.
Right.
And then you're going to have to manage those with your tools. If you have tools, if you're like me in freedom-based training, you got a really long walk to go get them.
Or back to the house to start again the next day.
Start again. So that's the freeze that we usually think of as a stress freeze. But I think there's also the freeze which is at the lower end, which is what I basically am calling comfort now, where again their eyes don't move very much, their ears don't move very much, but it's very relaxed, like all the muscles are kind of soft. But it's also a freeze state, like they're not actively trying to solve a problem there.
Right.
They're resting. And from that freeze state, they're either going to kind of wake up and become curious again, or they're going to rebound out of it and get concerned and say, that's it, I'm out of here.
Right.
And you got to figure out which one is it. Like how much tolerance does this particular horse have for rest? Or, how nervous do they get when they hear a sound? How vulnerable do they feel when they're resting? There's all these individual facts we need to learn about a horse. And then what we can do is we can take personal action with our body to stimulate a little curiosity before they get overwhelmed by their own state of rest, or before they get overwhelmed by that freeze that's like on the tipping point between fight and flight and curiosity. Now,
so,
it's really, really difficult to influence the freeze that's just before fight or flight. You got to have skill and talent and know what you're doing, because if you poke at it a little bit, you're just as likely to push them over the edge into fight or flight as you are to bring them back down into curiosity.
Right.
So you really need some skill to be able to manipulate that side of the spectrum. But the sleepy side of the spectrum, that's where we practice.
Right.
So when they're sleepy, if we can wake them up just a little bit and they get curious, what they do is they start developing a pattern where they're allowing us to take them from freeze to thinking. And if we do that enough times, it becomes a habitual pattern. Then tomorrow or next week, where they get in that really tight kind of freeze, the reactive type of freeze, we now have the tools to bring them back to curiosity because we've been practicing them from the sleepy state.
Right. Gotcha. So it's kind of like anything that you do, like practicing the tool or the exercise or the dialogue that you need before you actually need it, like learning the words before you need to have a sentence, before you need to ask for anything.
Yep.
So what would that look like? So when you teach some of the clinics, obviously you came here, but say you have, a competition horse or rider or that, then they have, how do you start? Like, how do you start this? If somebody is listening right now and they're like, okay, this all sounds really cool. I want to go to the barn tomorrow and play around with some of this stuff. Yeah. Like, what do I do? Like, what do they do?
So for people who want a little bit more information, I have a YouTube video. It's called Freedom Based Training 101. And it's got some cool footage that wasn't in the movie and things like that. But it's a little bit of some how-to about what you do. But basically what I am saying is that pretty much every day you enter your horse's space, you are for at least a few minutes doing freedom-based training. Before you call them to you, before you go put the halter on, before you start telling them what to do, you have a few minutes where they're just being them and you're just being you. And as you enter the space, if you know, what are their ears doing? Are their ears getting more mobile? Are they becoming more curious? Are their ears freezing up? Are they becoming more frozen? If they are becoming more frozen, is it a relaxed kind of freeze? Is it a tight kind of freeze? If so, what do I do about that? And what I say is that until they settle enough, you're going to just keep moving around the space. You're going to go check the water buckets. You're going to go look in the trees. You're going to check out the view. You're going to check all the fences. You're going to move around the space. And then when they get settled and they get a little curious, you're going to see if you can match them. Make your right foot like their right foot. Make your left foot like their left foot. And then think, how long is this good for? Because it has a time limit. And if you can get moving again before the horse goes, oh yeah, that's too much of that, they start to become more interested, more curious, more engaged.
Yeah. It's really hard to do because this, like you had us do this. I tried to do this, just the matching and then the moving before they move, take a step before. And it's wild because in the beginning you're like, okay. And then you're always one step late. And then, once you stop trying so hard, there's some energy or something that you start feeling that you feel it before they go, just a second, just a second before they do that. And, when you have really good rides or really bad rides, just the second before it goes wrong or before it goes right. There's some energy or something that's put off there that you're feeling that you're reading. And so the matching part of it is a really fun exercise to do. And it's like you said, actually, in the beginning of our chat was like, it's not, like it's slow work, but it's actually incredibly engaging, like you think this is going to be boring. You're like, actually, it's like this fun game. And, to keep up with it. And some horses, it is very slow because they're very slow. And some horses are really quick. You can't, you're trying to catch up and then you're like, why am I chasing you? But I just remember doing that. So that's definitely something, that anybody listening can go into the field or the paddock, or if you have a round pen and observe, right? Observe first. And then what you're suggesting is when they're calm enough, that's the moment that you start to match with that where they're sitting. And we live above our barn, and it's really fun because I'll sit sometimes, and we have a little baby now. So I'll be holding her, trying to get her to sleep. And I will just watch the horses in the field. And it's interesting, the different characters and the ones that are, how they match each other, who walks off first. And it's kind of fun trying to guess which one's going to walk off first. And one walks off, and then you think, is it going to be 1 minute? Is it going to be 30 seconds? Yeah. When is the next one it's going to go? And you can normally see the same thing right before the other one goes. There's something that they do, and then they they follow the other one or look the same way. It's really fun work. So when you, and Tick talks about this a lot about, and there's so many, like working with marine animals and a bunch of different professions where there's years of observation required before you can even touch an animal. Right. And like for us, we're like, we buy a horse, we ride a horse, like I don't even know what a horse looks like. And I can just buy one and get on one instead of having all this observation time. Was that something that was really mind blowing for you when you kind of had been around horses for your whole life? And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm just going to sit here. What was that like?
Yeah, that was it. Honestly, it was, I didn't know all the things I didn't know. I started the project and I was like, so I'm going to sit in the field for a couple of days, and then I'm going to get a sense for what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to start doing it. And then either it'll work or it won't. And I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but it sort of seemed really simple. And what ended up happening is when I really started watching, I got so much information that I was like, oh, I got to think about that. That is way more information than I thought I was going to get today. Really? And now I don't even know what to do with all those puzzle pieces I just picked up.
Wow.
So it occurred to me that until I had this sort of goal and this idea that I wanted to get to the goal with the horse volunteering for every step of the way, I didn't even know what I was looking at. It's like the world in a grain of sand. Eternity in a moment. It's that feeling of when you really look, there are more details than you had any idea before that. And just like most of us, for most of my life, I'd gotten on and I'd ridden, and it was fun and I had a great time, but I certainly was not seeing the details in a grain of sand.
Right.
And the funny thing is, I wasn't even sure I needed to. And even when I was making the movie, I didn't really think it would be useful for anybody else. I was like, this is an art project. I'm doing it for the sake of doing it. And I had no idea it would change my whole life.
Wow. And was that realization right after, during, or are you talking about it was 4 years later when you came back to it and you're like, actually, this is where I need to be?
So it was during, I realized this was the most fun I'd ever had with horses in my whole life. And it was sort of at that point where I was like, well, even if it's not useful to anybody else, this is going to be a thing I come home and I do secretly in my backyard.
There's that crazy lady sitting out in the field.
Right. I'm like, maybe nobody understands. And maybe I continue my real job and I do dominant training and I get horses fixed and I get them to do what they're supposed to do. And then I come home and I do this crazy thing that I don't tell anybody, because who wants to do that?
Little did you know.
Little did I know. And it's just blown me away that it really, all over the world, people bring me stories back of, I've had this problem my whole life and now I don't anymore. Or, I've done this thing that's always worked, but I never knew why. And now I know why. So the thing that works with my first horse now works with my third and my fourth and my fifth horse too.
Is that a donkey? What is that?
It is a donkey. So I was wondering if you could hear my donkey.
Yes. I was like, the donkey has something to say.
Yes. So that's my donkey, Eli. I just picked him up 2 days ago. He's from a rescue nearby, and he's been a little bit opposed to being touched. So he's coming to spend the summer at my house to learn that people are cool.
Oh, no kidding. Well, he has some stuff to say. That's awesome, Eli. He's speaking my language.
Yeah.
So on the dominant, let's just go through that. And obviously, I think a lot of people will end up going and following you and getting involved in following this in a lot more detail. But so we've got dominant training, which is kind of the top of where a lot of us have started.
Absolutely.
That's pretty normal. And that's more like pressure, release of pressure learning, correct?
Yeah, And I put food rewards in that category too,
Okay.
because I really think that once you have control of all the food resources and you're doling them out, there is a certain level of discomfort the horse feels every time you withhold the food. And so that is in the dominant spectrum in my mind.
Okay.
Now, I'd like to delineate dominance from what might be above it, more intense on the chart, which would be abusive leadership. And a lot of times people don't want me to use the word dominant because they think it's the same as abusive, and it's not. Dominant can be very, very good, very positive, very effective. Abusive leadership is where we put so much pressure on the animal that there's some lasting damage.
Right.
They become afraid of something for the rest of their life, or they injure part of their body and they can never walk right again. You know, it does happen that training sometimes slips into the abusive. And I don't condone it, but I want to put it there on the chart. And I'm the first to say, if my horse is stuck in a forest fire and I've got to get it in a trailer and it doesn't know how to get in a trailer and abusive is the only way I'm going to save its life, I'm willing to be abusive there, and then I'll fix it later.
Right.
But short of that, I'm not really sure I'm ever in that much of a hurry.
Yeah. That's like that kind of like when we just it's like safety. Like when safety of horse or safety of rider or person around, like you're willing to go to extremes to protect what needs to be protected. So then sorry, go ahead.
So then, you know, from there below dominance is where what I would call insistent leadership. And I think that's where most really good horse trainers sit a lot of the time. And that's where you don't need to put a whole lot of pressure on. But you probably couldn't do it without your halter on.
Right.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's where a lot of training is sort of like, I know you don't really want to do it, but I'm going to kind of insist with the tools I have, and then it'll work out well, and you trust me more. The whole goal of all of those stages, whether it's dominant or insistent, is that we get to what I call assertive. And assertive leadership is where I say to the horse, hey, will you do this thing for me? And they say, yes, I'm so glad you asked. End of story.
Gotcha. Right. Right.
But you have to earn trust before you can get to assertive leadership. You can't just be an assertive leader. You have to earn some trust. And the way you earn trust is either by forcing them to do it and having it turn out really well, or from the other side of the spectrum, which is where I work from the passive and the supportive, is you make such good decisions for your own human body that by the time you go ahead and you ask the horse to do something, they already trust you because of all the decisions you've made around them that were really good. So when you ask them to do something, they think, sure, I'm kind of curious. I'll give that a try. Everything else you've ever done has turned out well. I'm going to try the thing you've asked.
Right. So we've got the dominant insistent, assertive is kind of in the middle ground, supportive and passive. And so you start at passive, supportive, then get to the assertive. And the majority of us are dominant, insistent, with the goal of getting to the assertive.
Now, I think the very best trainers in the world, they alternate. So sometimes they're dominant and sometimes they're passive supportive, but they don't know how to talk about the passive supportive side. Like when you go catch your horse, everybody catches their horse a little differently. And that says something to the horse. You build a certain amount of trust in how you go out there to put the halter on. When you're grooming the horse, when you start grooming, when you stop grooming, you know, when your brush moves, when your brush doesn't move, all of that tells something to the horse. And so I think the very best trainers, even, you know, where you stand before you get on, how long do you stand there? You know, from the time you're standing on their left side to your right side, adjusting your stirrups, the way you do that either builds trust or destroys trust. And that is, it's one of those things in our culture we're expected to just figure out. Nobody talks about it. But I think the very best trainers are doing it all the time by feel and by instinct. And then my attempt is to say, well, how do we talk about that? So the people who aren't there can get a little bit of that benefit.
100%. It just jogs my memory to like 2007. It was a sunny day. And I remember being in England, and there was a horse. I was working at a yard, and there was a horse that for William Foxbit, who's got amazing amount of feel. And what was so interesting to me at the time when I worked for him is that he really didn't have a lot of language around it. And he grew up not needing to coach or do anything like that. But there was this horse that needed to be lunged, and I had a really crappy lunge line, honestly, and no stick, and the halter didn't fit, and the horse what was his name? His name was Chuckleberry, and he was really naughty, and I knew that from working around in the barn with him. He's really playful, like he wasn't, but you had to be a little careful. And I couldn't get him away from me, and I couldn't get him on. And William just wanted him to trot around and see how sound he was or something. And I hadn't, like, I'm like, I got no tools. Like, what do I do with my hands? And William just came over and just picked up the line, and the horse went out on a perfect circle and just trotted around. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm just seeing. But it was just something in his demeanor and his energy. And it was very clear and very easy. And there was nothing aggressive or anything about it. It's just like the horse clearly understood what the intention was, and that was it. And, in hindsight, looking back at it, I was trying so hard because I was, like I had to do this, and there was this pressure, and then it was the freak out if I don't have the tools, and it was me, and not one bit of the energy was just being like obvious about something that was easy to do. But like you said, I don't think if I had asked William right then, how did you do that? He would have had any idea. He just thought it was simple. Like, how could you not do that? So putting some context and like human words around this so that we can get better with our horses is like amazing. I mean, it's an amazing journey. And obviously people all over the world are picking up on this because I think where it sits in your gut, like it feels right, like you felt it before. And so you can connect to that, which just is so awesome. I just think it's so interesting. And I feel like I've used it a lot in my coaching because just the scales that you're using make sense. Like it just is very clear. So when you're working with some, like, cause you work with all sorts of like people that just work with their horses on the ground and also competitive riders and that type of thing. Like, how do you see this work? Are there times and stories or anything that you've seen where it's really integrated into a performance horse or in somebody's training that they've used kind of, I mean, obviously they have, but that you feel like it's really made a difference in a competitive horse's career? Like, is there anything like that?
There are lots of small stories like that,
Mm-hmm.
but this is where I get a little protective.
Yeah.
Those stories are so personal, and particularly when it comes to stuff like this, which is all feel and timing and awareness and energy. And, maybe my clinic was a tipping point for them, but it's not me that made the difference. It's not my work that made the difference. It's them that went home and did the work. And that's really something that I encourage all of my students to really immerse themselves in, is that, even when I go and teach a clinic, I'm not the teacher. Hopefully I'm a little bit of a translator, but the horse is the teacher.
Yeah.
And they're going to go home and they're going to keep learning from their horse. And so it's not freedom-based training that made a huge difference. It's just getting the ball rolling so that the human had permission to listen to their horse a little bit more, take a little bit more time, study a little bit more, figure out what is the thing that makes our relationship tick so that it all fits together better.
Yeah.
I'm not really going to tell you. There are. I'm amazed all the time the stories that I get, and I love it. But I also feel like it's not about me. It's not about my training method. It's just about getting the ball rolling for people.
And are you, every time you go to a clinic and you teach and all that, I mean, it's got to be fun. It's got to be a little bit like, now you have this depth of knowledge. And so you go to the clinics and you teach, and it's just like that. Like, you don't have to do a lot of prep work because the horses just present and you kind of point out what people can look for.
Yeah, but there's still always a horse or two that stumps me. And I got to go home and think about this one. This one's saying things that I haven't encountered before, and I got to think about it a little bit more, and I'll come back tomorrow with some ideas, and then we'll try them. Yeah. Because they are all unique. And so it is a trial and error as I get to know different horses. But it does get easier. This last tour that I did, I felt like I had the words to explain things better, which was good because I was teaching in France. So a lot of things had to go through a translator, which means I
wow.
have to think there and go, okay, how can I say this in the fewest amount of words possible? Because I've got to wait for
Right.
it to be translated and then wait for the student to try it before I can say the next thing.
Right.
And it's a good mental challenge for me. I feel like I teach
Oh my
so much better after having to do it with translation for a while.
You're like, I'm a translator that needs a translator. We've got
Yep.
4 different languages, 5 different languages going on here at one time.
Exactly.
That is amazing. And now, are you riding a lot when you're at home, or are you spending more time on your own 2 feet?
So I'm spending a lot of time on my own 2 feet. I'm ostensibly filming the 3rd movie right
Oh
now.
wow.
My schedule is a lot busier than it was when I did the 1st movie. So
Mhm.
the 1st movie was awesome. It was wonderful, but it was basically all I did. So I
Right.
spent 4 to 6 hours a day with one horse for a
Oh
year
my
to film
God.
that 1st movie. That's a luxury of time I don't have anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought that I was going to, in my 3rd movie, I thought I was going to recreate that 1st movie, but instead of having a mare and a foal, I was going to have 2 stallions.
Mhm.
And so I got one stallion off the range that was wild. He didn't know about people at all, so he was sort of my clean slate. And then I
Mhm.
got a stallion that was in the kill pen that was about to be sent to slaughter that was attacking people, who was
Oh my
dangerous.
God.
So I wanted to see if this same method, applied to 2 completely different stallions from different walks of life would
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
As it turned out, the dangerous stallion was way more dangerous than I anticipated.
Mhm.
And I bit off way more than I could chew. And
Mhm.
he's awesome now. But we're not done the
Really?
movie. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's like a different horse. It's so cool. But we are 5 years in now.
What?
So, yes.
Oh my
So
God.
my 1-year project has turned into a 5-year project.
Wow.
And I joke that I spend, quite a bit of time with Atlas because I was worried that he would kill somebody when I was away, or that he would hurt somebody, or, there was so much danger involved that he
Mhm.
got all of my attention. And
Mhm.
then Ari, the wild stallion, sort of gets 2 or 3 hours a week. And I'm like, hey,
Mhm.
buddy, you're doing great. You don't know a lot of stuff because I don't have any time for you, but nice to see you. I got to go
Yeah.
back to the other guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to go to the squeaky wheel. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's wild.
So yeah, so the long hair is a bit of a joke. I've never had hair this long in my life. And the joke was, when I started the movie, I was like, I'm not going to cut my hair until I'm done the movie.
Oh
And here we
my
are 5
God.
years later, and I still haven't cut my hair.
So what's your timeline finish? Like, is the end in sight, or where are we? Or are you gonna have your hair down to
I'm
your
not
to your
really
ankles?
sure. I might be sitting on it by the time we're done. There's a couple of things. One, we film every week. I have
Mm,
5 years of footage. The way I see it is, when we film something that looks like a grand finale, I will trace back through the years and pull a story
wow.
out of our line. And that's the goal. Um,
That's gonna be 5 years of editing. That sounds insane.
Yeah, well, the good news is I have a Patreon group. So every week for the last 5 years, I have posted a weekly video that updates their
Mm,
progress.
right.
So I have like a thumbnail of like
Mhm.
kind of what was happening each week. That's
Mhm.
really easy to go back and look at. In fact, anybody can. Anybody can join my Patreon. It's like $3 a month. You can be part of the
Awesome.
movie team, and you can
Awesome.
search any video you want to see for the last 5 years, and I post again every week.
I think you're gonna have a lot of people after this on that. That's really cool.
So yeah, it's Taming Wild on Patreon. But the idea is that I also really want to show people it's not about the end goal as
Mm,
much as it is about the journey along the way.
right.
And so while maybe I could push it faster, while maybe I could get to a grand finale more efficiently, what would I miss?
Right.
Like that, the world in a grain of sand thing. If I rush
Mhm.
past it, there's things that I miss studying.
Mhm.
And sure, I could get another horse and do another movie, and that's fun too, and I probably will at some point.
Mhm.
But I'm just kind of really reveling in all of the little teeny pieces that I'm learning
Yeah.
every week.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's amazing. It's again, it's an awesome perspective to look at it, because it's like, why would I rush through this if I'm just going to start again doing the same, like I'm getting out, like, why would I do that? Like, just we'll keep here enjoying this. That's a life lesson.
So I'm not riding either stallion yet. I'm really close to riding Ari. There's a couple of things holding me back. Namely that in the first movie, I rushed it with Myrna and I sat on her once and I know exactly what I did wrong, but then she wouldn't let me on her back for another 3 months after that.
Right.
And so I'm a little gun shy. Like I don't want to do it too soon and then have like that whole like frustrating period where I messed it up. But also Ari's the one that's ready to ride and he's the wild stallion. He's the one that I just haven't put much time in.
Right.
So at some point I have to go, okay, it's actually your turn.
Right. Once you get back from Belgium and Holland and England and Indiana.
All those places.
All of those places. That is wild. Okay. Well, I've had you on the phone for almost an hour. So
time flies.
It does. I know. But I want to ask you some of these questions that we wrap our podcast with. And they're a little bit more about you. So they're going to have to be a little bit more about you. And you can think about some, you can pass if you want, or we can circle back. But I am just going to start if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Number 1. All right. So the first question is, what is the biggest lesson a horse has taught you about yourself?
I don't know if it's the biggest one or the most current one.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. It's all in the spectrum.
So exactly. Really recently I've been studying this idea that the way we feel, our emotions, are the thing that really motivate every one of us. And yet they're not always all that wise or intelligent. And so emotions can often make us overreactive. They can make us self-defensive. And learning how to feel your emotions and be curious about them and still remain in a relationship, not self-defensive, not overreactive. I feel like this is something I coach my horses through every single day. And when I find a new way to help them somatically feel it in their body, how to be in a good relationship without being overwhelmed, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I should try that one too myself.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting, actually. That's one I'm going to have to think on for a little bit. Yeah, it's crazy. I was walking out of the barn the other day, and one of the girls was walking out at the same time, and she said, I've been in a funk for a few days, and I think I figured out why. And it's like, tell me. And she's like, I haven't had any music on. And because she had come in and she asked me for a speaker, and there was music playing in the barn all day. And we were just chatting. I said, yeah, it's kind of crazy how much music can just grab you emotionally. And then you feel invigorated or motivated or anything like that. Like running down the road with no iPad or motivating music, I'm like dead man walking. But if I hear like a really good song, all of a sudden I'm like, my 25K, can I get there? And it's crazy how, we were just talking about the emotional side of things can motivate and inspire. So we were just talking about that yesterday. So that's really interesting. If you can manage it, or what did you say? Have a relationship with it. Right.
Yeah. And be able to feel when emotions get too big, too much, too overwhelming without necessarily acting on that. Right. And that's where it gets difficult for the horses as well as people, I think, is, you feel a lot of feelings and you're like, oh my God, I got to defend myself. But that's not always in your best interest. Instead, you go, oh, I feel a lot of feelings. And how do I cooperatively work through this with the people I trust?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. Do you have a favorite training or competition mantra you reference regularly?
Yeah, it's the one we were talking about earlier. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
Life lessons.
That's my mantra. No matter where I am or what I'm doing, if it's getting better, stay out of the way. Let it just like, don't interrupt it. If it's getting worse, figure out what you're going to do to redirect whatever's happening. Yeah. And the sooner you know that, the better you're going to do redirecting it. Don't wait.
Yeah. Don't keep going down that road. I really love that. Is there a piece of advice that someone gave you along the way that you still reference today?
So many.
Yeah, it's a big one.
That's a really big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really think it's that the thing that really sticks with me that I often share is respond on your instinct. Don't think about it too much. And then go home and think about why that was your instinct. And if you want to reshape that for later.
Right.
But don't think too much in the moment. Just do what feels right. And then go home and think about it.
Think about it.
And I feel like that's so powerful with horses, because so often we want to think about it and then we're late.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've lost our moment.
Right.
So you really have to just, when you're with the horses, just respond.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Respond. Right. I write all this stuff down. Yeah. But and that's an interesting word choice, actually, because like to respond, like you are responding to something, you're hearing something, you're feeling something. And most of the time with the horses, if you do trust that first thing, like it's probably right. It's when you spend more time dissecting and thinking that you put more, you laden that with something that maybe not true, or a story that you make up or a situation.
Yeah. So the time I've spent with trainers where, I go over videos of rides, I sat there and did that with you. Actually, we looked at that ride of yours, and it was really fun to go, well, what was I thinking in that moment, and why were my responses that, and why did it go that way? That's really fun to pick apart and dissect, and it's going to help you do better next time.
Yeah.
But in the middle of the jump course is not the time to dissect it.
Yeah. Too much thinking. Yeah. And exactly. Then the timing is gone. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. What do you do when you are seeking inspiration?
Honestly, I sit in the hay trough and I listen to the horses eat. And I think about how simple that moment is and how complicated I like to make everything else.
That's inspiring.
It is because, I think a lot of the problems that I end up with is because I get overwhelmed. I try and pour too many pieces together in one pot and stir it, and it just turns out terrible. And if I can just think, okay, how do we simplify it? I know where you want to go. I know what you want to do, but you're putting too much into it. You need to break it down, make it simpler. And that listening to the horses chew and swallow and chew and swallow. And it's just like, that's life right there. Just like make it that simple, one bite at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Well, and it's like a running joke here. It's like, just keep it simple. That doesn't mean being simple is easy. Like simple is not easy. Like for some reason, those words are like synonymous, and it's like they couldn't be more opposite. Like keeping things simple is very difficult. And I was reading a book, and it was just basically talking about, most of the answers that you need to know, you already know. Like, you just already know. And it's amazing when you ask yourself, like, what am I feeling, or what am I thinking, or what do I need to do right now? It like, Dick always jokes all the time. It's like, it's amazing how many people, because I'm one of the people that is always looking on the newest fad diet or this or that. He's like, work out more and eat healthy. Like, that's it. Like, how many different ways can people frame that? I'm like, okay. But I just heard of this new way that you can do it.
But the thing is, that's what spikes your curiosity and your interest and your engagement. And we like all that. We want all those emotions that are motivating. So all of that is good. And that's part of the simplicity. The thing that makes simplicity difficult is not the simplicity itself. It's picking which simplicity is most important.
You just complicated that.
So you have
just got hard.
you have 10,000 simple options you could do.
Yeah.
There are many, many roads to Rome. Choosing which tiny first step you're going to take, that's where it gets difficult, is the choosing. Yeah.
100%. Very, very well said. Yeah.
Once you choose, it's not that difficult. Until you then realize you chose wrong, and then you gotta like retrace.
Yeah. And you go home, you think about that, reshape that, and pick another simple one.
Yep.
Yeah. But then you're curious again, as long as you can be okay with that journey.
Yep.
Totally. All right. Our last question. Have you had an experience or an adversity separate from horses in your life that you feel like has directly influenced you as a horseman or horsewoman, horse lady?
Yeah. So when I was 19, I thought that I was going to give up horses and I was going to be a professional dancer. I moved to the city. I took every dance class I could. I wanted to get into musical theater. I loved it. I loved every aspect of it. And then I realized that I was going to be expected to perform while injured. The show goes on. And I thought, I don't know if I want to build my entire career around something that could always be potentially so painful. The show goes on.
Right.
And that really, really shaped a lot of choices I made after that about my life. So even as a horse trainer, I have so much respect for the upper levels of sport, but I realized that I could still have a really good time as a horse trainer and shape my life in a way that I wasn't expected to perform while injured. Like rest was allowed. And I think that's something that's not always presented to us as an option in our drive hard society.
Right.
And that impacted me in, I think, a really, really good way.
Yeah.
And now the ironic thing is I am one of those people that usually will perform when injured. Like you can totally drop me off a horse, break some ribs, and I'll still get on the plane the next day and go teach all day. So
yeah.
I'm still one of those people that will, but remembering that I don't have to, like that's a choice.
Right.
And it's a choice you get to make. And I chose not to be a dancer specifically because of that reason. I felt like I was going to be putting that decision in too many other people's hands where I might let people down too much.
Right. Yeah.
If I wasn't willing to make that sacrifice. And so I chose a job where I felt like I could work for myself more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting.
I think that horses struggle with that too, you know.
Yeah.
Because they can't always tell us where they're injured. They can't always tell us what's wrong. And so some of them are more stoic and some of them are less stoic. And, you know, sort of realizing that that is a really interesting, complicated puzzle that goes into being curious, being engaged, being overwhelmed, being willing to work with others, or being self-defensive. That's part of it.
Yeah.
And being in a position where I felt that and I knew what it felt like from a personal place has given me a lot of empathy for the horses, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. That's wild. And that's a really interesting and pretty powerful that you were aware. I mean, because like 19, that's pretty young to be self-aware enough to know this doesn't feel quite as it should. Like something's wrong here.
And you know, the interesting thing for me is that the conclusion I came to is I don't want to be forced into that, but I might choose it anyway.
Right.
Like I want to be able to choose to work injured if the work is important enough to me.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about my horses too. You know, if they're hurt, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't want to do it. Like at that point, I have to decide whether I'm going to let them do it or not.
Yeah.
But just because they're hurt doesn't mean they're going to be self-defensive or overwhelmed. Like you can build a super resilient horse that goes, I still want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's fun and exciting and beautiful.
Yeah.
And not because they're forced into it, but because they love it that much.
Well, and that can be healing in itself. I mean, I know one of the things that motivates me when I am feeling injured or slightly broken in some ways is actually doing something that's inspiring.
Yeah.
Makes you feel like you have purpose in your whole, as opposed to being like, having somebody else tell you have to do this makes you go the other way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So yeah.
Wow, that's really wild. This has been so great. This is so inspiring. Where are you leaving? You're home for a week or two, and you get to work with Eli, and then
Yep, I'm home for a week. I'll get one of my students started with Eli, so she'll do a lot of the foundation work while I'm gone for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will be in Netherlands, Germany, and then Poland.
Oh my
and
gosh.
then I'll be home for a couple of weeks, and then I head out again to Switzerland and the UK, and then I'm home for a couple of weeks, and then, just so pretty much for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Things will settle down. You say that every day until you die. So how do people get involved? How do people follow? How do you follow your journey?
The easiest way is to go to tamingwild.com. It's my website. And at the top of the page, it says join Patreon here. So if you want to see the weekly videos, that's a really good way to get involved more. Mm-hmm. I'm also, tomorrow, I'm doing what I call a freedom-based learning salon, which is where once a month we pick a topic. Mm-hmm. And we do a Zoom call, and people who are following me get to ask questions, and we just sort of riff about that topic for an hour or so. So that'll be fun.
It's a very West Coast term, riff about that topic. It's very cool. Very cool. Yeah. That's so awesome.
Well, so pretty much everything is found on the website, tamingwild.com.
Tamingwild.com.
Yep.
Perfect. And your clinic schedule and everything is on there. So
clinic schedule's on there, YouTube channel. I also do a little talk every Tuesday that's a tea time. It's just public, and I drink tea and chat about whatever's on my mind.
Love it. This has been so amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know we're going to have a ton of, I think you'll probably have a ton of new fans on there, and probably fans that are very excited to finally get you on this platform. And hopefully we can get you, I guess we're going to need to book for probably can't get you to 2024 now, I would imagine.
I'm booked about a year in advance. So yeah, I'm booked through April next year at this point.
Yeah. Okay. I'm on it. So hopefully we can get you down to Florida, and maybe we can get some of our followers here. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will follow you and be fangirls here. I'll be a fangirl here from now until the end of time. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elsa.
Great talking to you.
Great talking to you.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Before you go, I just want to let you know more about Ride IQ. At its core, Ride IQ gives everyone access to instruction from the best equestrian coaches in the world. It might sound impossible, but with Ride IQ, you get access to the private mobile app that has hundreds of on-demand, listen while you ride audio lessons taught by top riders and coaches in eventing, hunter jumpers, and dressage. Here's how it works. You look through the app and choose a lesson based on your horse or a skill you're working on. There are lessons for green off-the-track thoroughbreds and nervous horses, and horses that are behind the leg, as well as lessons that teach every stage of skills like shoulder in or trot lengthenings. Then you tack up and press play, and you have a top coach like Doug Payne or Leslie Law or Gina Smith in your ear guiding you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, it is always appreciated if you can take a moment to share the podcast with your friends and family and leave a review on your podcast app. The best way to support the podcast is to become a Ride IQ member at ride-iq.com. And when you do, we hope you're excited to see that In Stride is just one of multiple podcast shows on the app, including hack chats, conversations with coaches, and more. And lastly, I wanted to let you know that our friends over at Major League Eventing also have a podcast. And if you enjoyed this show, I think you would also really enjoy their show. Just search for the Major League Eventing podcast in your podcast app and give it a listen.